Last year, BookThinkers did about 250,000, and that's because halfway through the year I read.
Raise your hand if you have read the legendary book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Oh, awesome. Over half the room. Now raise your hand again if I can call on you and you can tell me all 7 habits. One person? Okay. It begs the question, what is the use of reading or learning anything, any information, if you can't recall what you know?
Why am I reading these books if I'm choosing not to retain and implement the information? A lot of people are reading self-help and personal development style books. Only a small portion of people are actually taking action on the information.
You've interviewed Alex Ramosi, Dan Berzelian, Ryan Holiday, Patrick Bet-David, Grant Cardone, and a lot more. How do you get these big guests on your show?
Sort of like the hot girl analogy, like the hot girl at the bar, all the guys are scared to go up and talk to her. So as a result, nobody does. There's a fear of rejection. And then she leaves thinking nobody wants to talk to her because nobody goes up and asks. And so all these famous people that you mentioned, they're getting less inquiries than you might imagine because everybody's doing the same thing that you're doing. Oh, he's not going to answer. After interviewing all these amazing people, I've realized that each and every one of them was patient. Nobody had an overnight success story. It all took so many more years behind the scenes than we give them credit for.
So on your bookmark, you have a Mark Twain quote, and it says, "The man who does not read good books is no better than the person who can't." So what does that quote mean, if you could break that down for us?
I love that quote. Well, here's the deal. I was not much of a reader growing up. I was more of the jock stereotype, so I played football, I was captain of the wrestling team, and I chose not to read. And that version of myself, who was not a reader, really up until the age of 20, had no opportunity to benefit from all of these great books. And so there was no difference between me, who was deliberately choosing not to read, and somebody who literally couldn't read in the first place. I had this amazing skill, and I chose not to read. So I think that reading personal development books and taking action on what we learn is one of the most underutilized skill sets that most of us possess. And so that's why I love to highlight that quote. We can all read, and if you're choosing not to, you're choosing to live under your potential.
What do you say to someone that says, "But Nick, I'm not a reader. I just don't read"? What do you say to that person?
I have so many fun things to say to that person. Number one, I like to ask them, hey, if I gave you $10,000 to read a book by next week, do you think you could do it? And everybody says, yeah, of course, I could read 10. Well, I'm not giving the $10,000 out, but it shows that it's a question of priority. And so instead of trying to find time to read, I like to say, we need to prioritize it and we need to schedule time to read. We need to replace low impact activities like scrolling through Instagram and watching Netflix with something a little bit more powerful, like reading a personal development book. And whenever I think about sacrificing short-term pleasure like Instagram or Netflix with something like reading, I like to think of my future self. Like, what is Nick in the future going to think about my Instagram scrolling or my Netflix? Not much. He might regret having spent that time on something so meaningless. But what will future Nick think about the time that I spend on reading personal development books and implementing them? Like, he's probably going to be pumped. He's probably going to be super happy with me. And I want to serve that guy, that version of myself in the future who will benefit from the books, not really benefit from the social media.
Exactly. I mean, people on social media, it's not like they deliver value, but the books are way more in depth. So you get all the details of the stuff, and those details are extremely important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw a clip from a keynote that you did, and you asked the crowd how many people have read the books, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and almost everyone in the crowd rose their hand. And then you asked the crowd how many of you can name all 7 habits, and only one person raised their hand. Why do you think that? Why do you ask the audience that question? What point were you trying to make when you asked that question?
One of my mentors, Kevin Horsley, he is the first person that stated that question to an audience. It was at a TED Talk that he was giving. And I thought it was so powerful because it gets everybody to stop and think, well, why am I reading these books if I'm choosing not to retain and implement the information? And it's only by retaining information that you can truly live it and use it. And so, yeah, I think that a lot of people are reading self-help and personal development style books. Only a small portion of people are actually taking action on the information. And so, yeah, I think it's a fun way to kind of slap everybody in the audience, wake them up and get them to pay attention. But I also think it's an important lesson. Like, only by retaining and implementing the information that we read are we truly living it, changing our behavior and getting the most out of the books.
So how do we retain the information that we read on books? Do we take notes? Like, what are some things that you do to retain that information?
Yeah, there are so many things that I highlight in my book, Rise of the Reader, but I'll start with one of my favorite things. I love to set an intention for each book that I'm reading. And so I'm about to start a book that's over here in front of us, Amplify Your Influence by Renee Rodriguez. It's a book on effective communication. That's something that I'm always looking to improve. So instead of just aimlessly reading the book, I'm going to set an intention for that book. And that intention will follow the SMART goal framework. It's going to be specific, measurable, attainable. It's going to be written and relevant to my life, and it's going to be time-bound. So instead of reading aimlessly, maybe I'll say, hey, I'd like to find and implement at least 2 strategies for improving my communication by the end of next week when I finish reading the book. And then I'll even add a little bit of flavor, because when I was younger, I really struggled with social anxiety. I had very poor communication skills, and I knew that only by improving my communication skills could I live up to my full potential. And so it means a lot to me to improve my communication. So what happens is our brains have this natural filtering mechanism called an RAS, or reticular activating system. And by reviewing that intention each and every time you read a few more chapters, you're so much more likely to find and implement those 2 habits for improving your communication. That's what your brain is looking for. And so without a proper intention, we're so much less likely to take meaningful action. That's why I think it's important to set an intention for each book. That's just step 1. There are so many different steps. And setting an intention has changed everything for me.
Yeah, I've noticed that there's a big difference between learning a lesson in a book and actually going to that lesson in real life. I find this happens to me a lot, where it's like I read something in a book and I kind of brush it off. And then something happens to me in real life. I'm like, oh, wait a second. And so so that's a good way of taking action on that thing, is actually a good way of making it, of actually implementing the things that you learn instead of just reading in a book. And so, what's your thoughts on yes, you can learn stuff in books, but what's your thought on also going through real life experiences? What effect does that have on learning and not just reading?
Yeah, I think, listen, I read 1 hour a day and I implement what I've read, which is taking action and learning, for 15 hours a day. Wow. And I sleep 8.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that reading is such a small piece of what I do. Most of what I do is taking action on what I've read. And so I think books are amazing because a good personal development book condenses decades of somebody else's lived experience into days of consumption. So I can gain 30 years or 40 years of wisdom in just a few hours by reading about that person's life. That might help me better navigate a future obstacle that pops up in my own life. It's not a replacement for going through the experience yourself, but I think it's a great way to navigate future situations more effectively. I have a problem with the U.S. public education system because most of us are taught that failure is a bad thing. But it's only through failure, by taking action on what we learn and failing, that we make progress. It's not the only way, but it's what happens most of the time. And so as a business owner who's now had a business for 6 or 7 years, it's grown a lot, I have 10 employees, that's only happened because of failure over and over and over and over again. And so what I think happens to us in the public education system is that we're taught failure is bad. And then when we start a business, we realize, oh no, failure is where all of the magic happens. That's where all the money is made. That's how you become healthier. That's how you become happier. That's how you become wealthier, whatever the case is. It's through failure. And so, that's how I feel about action.
Yeah, I feel like avoiding failure is almost a disadvantage. And I feel like a lot of people out there are avoiding failure when it's actually you're going to have to fail eventually. So why not just get it out of the way, right?
Yes.
So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to name a bunch of different topics of books. And I want you to just name, it could be 1, 2, 3. It could be your best recommendation for that certain topic. And so for business, if someone wants to start a business, what do you think? Well, what book should they buy? What book should they pick up?
If you're just starting a business for the first time, I recommend The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. This is an older book, but right in the front, he says 95% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years. And then he goes on to tell you how to avoid failing while you're starting a business. It's all about setting up systems, and it's a beautiful story. It's very easy to read, and I highly recommend it. If you are a small business owner that's looking to grow your business and really maybe double, triple, quadruple your revenue pretty quickly, I recommend $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozi. I read that book last year, and it was a huge turning point for my business. Revenue quadrupled within just a few months. And that book is easy, it's actionable, it's written at a 3rd grade reading level, so literally anybody can understand and apply it. And Alex is just amazing at what he does. So those are the 2 that I'd recommend.
And you also interviewed Alex. What was the biggest takeaway that you got from that interview? Because I watched it before I came here, and it's a great interview. I think it's one of his best. You almost sounded a little emotional at one point. Like it was like a really good in-depth interview. So like, what was your biggest takeaway from that interview? I suggest anyone watching this to, right after you watch this, to go ahead and watch the BookThinkers interview with him.
Yeah, that interview has been watched for over 10,000 hours so far, which is just so cool. And that's the power of somebody like Alex Hormozi coming on your podcast, because no other episode is performed like that for us. Alex is an amazing guy. What did I learn from that episode specifically? I think that I learned nothing is as fancy as it seems. And what I mean by that is Alex on social media, there's nobody hotter than him right now. He's growing like wildfire. Everybody wants to be like him. Everybody wants to talk to him. But he's a normal dude. He fumbled around for like the first 10 minutes trying to get his camera and mic set up, and somebody had to come over and help him.
And even then, it was like his computer, like it wasn't like pious. Not that it was bad quality, but it was like on his camera. Like
yeah, it was laptop. And so it was just his webcam. It wasn't super high quality. And at one point, I don't know if we edited it out or not, but at one point he kind of fumbled around and forgot what he was talking about. And so I think what I realized, now it wasn't actual subject matter that he talked about, but what I realized interviewing Alex is that he's just a normal guy. He has insecurities. He has, pitfalls and shortcomings just like everybody else. Yeah, he's super ripped. Yeah, he's super wealthy. And, but he's just a guy. And that was kind of my biggest takeaway from interviewing him. It was so much fun. It's an amazing interview. And a lot of people, just like you mentioned, and I love this, a lot of people commented on the video on YouTube and they said, hey, I've watched every interview that Alex has done. Thank you for not hosting a cut and paste interview. Thank you for touching on subjects that, people don't typically ask about. We all know his backstory. Thank you for avoiding the introduction, just kind of like you did today. So yeah, that's, it was such a fun experience.
So from $1 million offers, what do you think is, you said it really changed the way that you approach business and really helped you. What was the number one thing from that book that you think made that difference that you learned?
Alex teaches a value equation. It's essentially a formula for increasing your average deal size. And I went through the frameworks and the exercises in his books, and I discovered a new way to serve my ideal target clients, something that I previously thought wasn't possible. And if I thought it was possible, I thought it was going to be too expensive. But Alex says, build this offer, pitch it, see what happens. And the very first person I called when I thought of this new service, that by the way was about 10 times bigger than my average deal size, I called him up and he says to me, Nick, I need that service. Not only do I need it, but I thought about it recently and I thought about you helping me solve this problem. And so I went and I started selling it, and my average deal size went through the roof. I started working with less people, but at a much higher value. And so I could serve each person, provide more value, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, I even saw this myself before we started this podcast. I saw that implemented myself. That was really cool to see. It was really educational for me to watch. So the next topic is happiness. If someone is struggling with happiness, what book should they pick up?
Most of my happiness and fulfillment stems from being connected to a purpose. And so I think everybody should read Built to Serve by Evan Carmichael. It's a book that helps you understand who you should be serving and how you can serve them. In that book, Evan says your purpose comes from your pain. So for me, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was operating from a place of ego on one side of the spectrum that would represent itself at the expense of other people. And that wasn't a lot of fun to be around. And I was also struggling with a lot of insecurities, which limited my potential. By reading books, I was able to overcome that. And now my entire business and my communities, they help support people by connecting them to the right book at the right time. It can make all the difference. And so why am I happy and fulfilled every day? Because I'm connected to my purpose, gets me out of bed in the morning. And Evan Carmichael's book, Built to Serve, is sort of the reason that that's all happened for me.
Any other books on happiness you can think of?
So many. There's a book by Gaur Gopal Das, and let's see, what is the title of that book? I know that he's the author, and he has a quote in there where he says, it's not happy people that are grateful, but it's grateful people that are happy. So it's by practicing gratitude with intention that leads to happiness, not the other way around. A lot of people think, I need to be happy in order to practice gratitude. No. You need to practice gratitude, and that will lead to happiness. So that's one of my favorites as well.
Productivity. There's a bunch of productivity books out there. What would you say your best recommendations would be?
I have so many recommendations here. This is one of my favorite genres to study. I really love Essentialism by Greg McKeown. It teaches you how to do more with less. In that book, he says there's a diminishing return at some point once you hit too many hours into the funnel. So working more doesn't always lead to better progress. In fact, it can detract from the progress that you've made. And so he teaches you how to differentiate between high-impact activities and low-impact activities. And then using another one of my favorite recommendations, the 4-Hour Work Week, once you're able to differentiate between what has high impact and high leverage and low impact, low leverage, you can automate, delegate, or eliminate all of the low impact activities so that you can just focus on the high impact activities. And it's one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah. Health. Do you have any books about health that you've been reading?
Oh yeah, tons of them. One of my favorites, I think I read it last year, is Life Force by Tony Robbins and Peter Diamandis. I was able to interview Peter on our podcast. And Life Force helps you in every area of your life. It helps you improve your sleep, your diet, your supplementation. It talks all about the future of medical technology and how it's going to help us live longer and solve health-related problems. He says that longevity is all about, he calls it like information biology or something like that. And we can now quantify so much of what's going on day to day in our lives. So yeah, that's a really good book, Life Force. And, another one of my favorites about sleep specifically is Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. That's a book that I've read a couple of times. And I think sleep is one of my superpowers. I have amazing sleep quality and quantity as a result of that book. And I'm a total sleep nerd.
Do you have any tips for sleep? Anyone here that maybe is struggling with sleep? Now, do you have any tips for them, like practical stuff that you do?
Oh yeah, I have tons of them. I'll just list a few and maybe your audience will find a few of these things interesting. Number one, temperature. So temperature. I like to set the thermostat to 68 degrees, which is a little chilly. And then I also use what's called an 8-sleep mattress pad. I used to use a chilly pad. Now I use an 8-sleep. And what it does is it really sinks the temperature. My mattress is 56 degrees that I sleep on. And then as you go throughout the night, in order to get better sleep cycles, the temperature goes up a little bit. And then it goes up a little bit when you hit your REM. And then it kind of goes up even higher when I'm ready to wake up. And so it's such a cool tip. I also wear an eye mask to block out light. I wear earplugs to block out noise. I use a noise machine to block out noise. I wear mouth tape over my mouth so that I'm forced to breathe through my nose.
Sorry about that, yeah.
Yeah, blackout curtains in my room. I take some supplements. And so all of those things together, I also track everything with this Aura ring that I wear. It's a sleep tracking ring. And so all these things together have just led to a beautiful sleep schedule.
And what has the effect been? Because I'm assuming there was a time, like everyone in when you're late teens, early 20s, were you just not neglect sleep, but maybe, do all that stuff you just mentioned. What was the difference between before and after you implemented all this stuff on your sleep? And not only when it comes to your sleep, but how it affected your day.
Oh yeah. Listen, I think I did neglect my sleep for most of college. I went to the University of New Hampshire. And Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights out drinking until the sun came up. Alcohol is terrible for you. And mixing it with caffeine, I used to drink a lot of rum and cokes. What a dumb decision. Not only are you hurting your sleep quality by consuming alcohol, but you're also putting caffeine into your system at 1 a.m.
Yes, so that's going to hurt your sleep quality.
here's the thing. When I was in college, I used to get very fatigued in the afternoons because I wasn't paying attention to my sleep. Now I'm able to work literally a 12-hour day the entire day and have fantastic energy the entire experience. So that's the result of better sleep. I have better energy, and as a result, I'm able to show up better in my relationship. I'm able to show up better for my business and for everybody that I interact with, and energy is extremely important.
Probably happier too.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Everyone relates to that. Where like you're like there are times where like you can be in a bad mood and you realize like, oh wait, I did not get good sleep last night. That could be why. And then the nights where you do get good sleep, it's like night and day. So we talked about business. What about personal finance? Maybe personal investing. No, so not necessarily making the money, but what you should do with the money. Any books regarding personal finance?
I have tons of recommendations here. I think so as far as money management goes, dealing with your own personal finances, like where to put money, how to structure it, bank accounts and stuff, I recommend I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. That's a wonderful book. It teaches you how to automate things. So here's an example. Money hits your bank account. A certain amount is automatically delegated to an emergency fund. You never saw it. You don't even know that it hit there. Delete that emergency fund bank app from your phone, block it on your computer, and just let the money grow. And so we're forced to use a little bit less money, but you'll adjust pretty quickly. So I really love that tip. Gap money. So in a business, we all know that revenue minus expenses is profit. But in our personal lives, is there an equivalent? I read this book called Capitalize Your Finances by Chris Panayiotou. And he says that income minus expenses, that's your gap money. And so what do you do with your gap money? His book talks all about how it should be invested, the rules for investing, and it's really easy to read. Chris is super empathetic to people who don't have the language to deal with money, and so he's very helpful with it. I definitely recommend that book too.
Great. Anything that you recommend personally for personal finances? Maybe I know a lot of people might be struggling with spending habits, saving. Anything that you do?
Yeah, well, automatically delegating some money to an account that you can't see, that's definitely a tip that I recommend. In that book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, he has a really interesting framework for budgeting. He says, let's toss out the word budget and let's think about using our money this way. Cut ruthlessly on the things that you don't care that much about and that aren't serving you. And so, for instance, eating bad food, that's hurting your health. And it's unnecessary money that you're spending, so just cut it out. Now you'll have more money and better health. It's kind of like a double whammy. And he says, spend your money on things that you truly care about. And so an example for me is that I love traveling internationally, and I love spending my money on food and restaurants and stuff in international cities where it's new, it's novel, it's refreshing. And as a result, I have to cut ruthlessly while I'm at home. I don't want to eat at the same restaurant for the 58th time in the Boston area. I'd rather go experience something brand new in a fun, eclectic city in South America or something. And so that's an example of how I think about budgeting. It doesn't bring me a ton of joy to go to Chili's again, but it brings me a ton of joy to, experience something new and different in a new city.
Great. So what about for relationships? You're married. And so do you have any book recommendations for people who maybe are in a relationship? And because I'm not married, but I've heard that it can be difficult. And so do you have any book recommendations for relationships?
Yes. My favorite recommendation is The 5 Love Languages. It's a wonderful book. Rachel, my wife, and I, we listened to the book together on a long car ride one time. I think we were driving from Massachusetts to Florida or something, so we had a lot of time in the car. And we listened to that book, and it essentially says that each person has a love language, and we have a preference for how we receive love, and we also have tendencies for how we give love, and they don't always match with our partners. So my love language might be the time that I'm spending with somebody, and her love language might be physical touch. So I'm here like receiving love in the way that she wants to receive it, and she's receiving my love in the way that I want to receive it, and it gets all mixed up, and that's how communication sometimes falls apart. So I think everybody should listen to that book, and that way you can better understand how your partner operates. It's a really easy read, and it fosters a ton of discussion. I think we we consistently would pause the audiobook in the car and we would just talk about things. And that openness is really important.
I know I said for people that are entering a relationship, but I also think if you're single, maybe you should also look into that stuff too, so you're prepared when you do eventually find someone, and you don't learn lessons the hard way. So the next one is philosophy. Any book recommendations for philosophy?
I think you know this already, but I'm a huge fan of Stoicism. I love Stoic philosophy. I love learning from philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus. These people have an actionable philosophy that centers around virtue, and you can use it to improve your life. So my favorite book in the world of Stoicism is probably The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. I have a few copies right here. It's a daily read. Each day you read a passage from a Stoic philosopher like the ones that I mentioned about wisdom or perseverance or the art of living. And you'll read a little passage from one of their ancient texts, and then the authors, Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman, they'll comment on it and they'll apply it to modern day life. It takes you 2 minutes to read each and every day, and it will open you up to these beautiful ideas of philosophy that maybe you weren't aware of before. And as a result of that book, I've read a ton of other books on Stoicism and philosophy in general, but that's a really good one.
What's maybe some autobiographies that really inspire? Because the thing about autobiographies that can be really helpful is I feel like it's really good to look at other people's stories and see how you can implement the stuff they did to your own life. So what autobiographies do you think are the best that would motivate people to just improve their life or just motivate them in general?
One of my favorite autobiographies is Total Recall by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold has the highest dream to reality ratio out of anybody I've ever seen. He grows up in rural Austria in a house that doesn't even have plumbing or running water. And, he joins the military, then ends up becoming a, Mr. Olympia fitness champion, conquers that world. Then he goes into Hollywood, gets paid $10 million a movie. Then he goes into business. He's a very successful business person behind the scenes. Then he goes into politics and becomes the governor of California, one of the largest standalone economies on the planet. And all of that from a rural village in Austria, while nobody can understand half of what he's saying. And he doesn't fit the typical stereotype for politician, for business owner, or for movie star. And so it's a wonderful book. And I really love that one. I'll throw out a second one, which is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. That's another great book. I recommend the audiobook because he goes back and forth with his writing partner, and they kind of host like a podcast in between each chapter. And David Goggins is somebody who lost 100 pounds, became a Navy SEAL, an Army Ranger, sort of, kind of. Yeah, I won't spoil anything for anybody. And just a total crazy human being that accomplishes amazing things and a really tough mentality.
And I feel like you should definitely, if you're a fan of David Goggins, you should definitely read it because it also goes into depth on his story. And you're like, oh, wow, like this is deep. Like this is like really tough. And like he went through some really hard stuff. Have you read the Steve Jobs autobiography?
Yes. Yeah. By Walter Isaacson.
Yes. It's really big. It's a giant book.
Yeah.
So when did you read that and what takeaways did you take from that book?
I read that very early in my reading journey, and I actually listened to it. So I listened to it, and Steve Jobs and Steve
Wozniak.
I just had a little mental blank there. So yeah, Jobs and Wozniak starting Apple in Wozniak's parents' garage or whatever the story is. Like that gives me so much inspiration. Apple is a $1 trillion company, and it was started by two kids in a garage. I mean, what a wonderful story. It gives me a lot of hope and inspiration to realize that we're all just humans, like I mentioned earlier with the Hormozy thing, and we're all capable of doing such wonderful things, and it can start in a garage with just an idea. So yeah, I really enjoyed reading that book. Steve Jobs is an incredibly complicated person. And I think it's important to understand what somebody like that goes through as they're building a company. But his standards for excellence are unmatched. I mean,
it also goes over a lot of his flaws too, which one of his flaws people believe led to his death with his diet and all of that. And so, yes, it's a really good insight on, like, because when you think of Steve Jobs, you think of all the good stuff, but it's also a really good insight on not only his background, but some of the flaws that he had in general.
Yeah, because of that book, I learned that at his funeral, I believe, they passed out copies of Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. Steve had also traveled through India a little bit and read that book when he was a little bit younger. And so I decided to read that book or listen to that book, and it was amazing as well. It's a great happiness book. It deals with a lot of Eastern style philosophy on happiness and wellness and spirituality and things like that. So it's another good one.
What book would you say had the biggest impact on you, if you could pick one?
Well, the first book that I ever read was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And if I had not read that book first, I don't think I'd be living the life I'm living today. I don't think I'd be interviewing these amazing people. I wouldn't have written my own book. So I just, based on everything else that came because of reading that book, I have to give all of the credit where it's due, and that's Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah. What was the biggest takeaway that you got from that book? If you could think of one thing, there's a lot of good stuff in there that kind of like, if you're not aware of the stuff beforehand, it kind of blows your mind a little bit. It makes you like, almost like awakens you to like, oh, wait a second, this is how the rich people actually get rich, and not just making salaries and working jobs and all that.
I have 100 different ways that I could answer your question because I've read the book 5 or 6, maybe even more times now. Biggest takeaway, that money, okay, you don't have to be materialistic in order to enjoy the game of money. Money is a game. It's a game that you might as well win. You have to exchange money for food, water, shelter, and the more money you have, the more money you can give. So money is not this taboo subject that we should avoid discussing. In fact, we should study the world's most successful money managers and most successful people so that we can learn how they made their money, so that we can create wealth for ourselves. It's just a game. You know, if somebody goes out and fishes every single day, they're going to know how to fish more efficiently than you are if you don't go out and fish. People who study money and they play the game and they practice, they're going to make more money than you because they understand how it works. It's a skill set. We should all be very good at that skill set because it'll set us up for success, and it'll create, it'll remove a lot of that scarcity mindset that so many of us unfortunately have.
Yes. And a big part of the book is talking about not being scared to spend, because I feel like a lot of people are so attached to like saving their money, but you're not, that's like, it basically says that book, that's not how you're going to get rich. Like you need to be able to spend it on things that are going to make you money in the long term.
Yeah. He says something like, I've never met a rich person who hasn't lost money, but I've met a lot of poor people who've never lost a dime. And that's the idea that you have to play the game. You have to learn through failure.
So you've interviewed a lot of big names, just to name some few: Alex Hormozi, Dan Bilzerian, Ryan Holiday, Patrick Bet-David, Grant Cardone, and a lot more. How do you get these big guests on your show? What things do you do to reach out? What do you say to them? What value do you provide for them?
Yes. I have so many different ways that I could answer this question as well, because I've learned a lot over time. I know we're going to talk a little bit about the third door and sort of the hot girl analogy in a minute, so I'll take this a different direction. I like to be a surgeon with my words. Surgeons don't make extra cuts while performing surgery, and salespeople, podcasters, shouldn't use extra words while prospecting for a guest. So here's my formula. I love to reach out to a potential guest, and I love to say, congratulations on the upcoming release of your book, or congratulations on the release of your book. I interview authors and then I'll mention 3 or 4 names that I can see they already follow on Instagram. So there's a point of familiarity. So congratulations on your upcoming release. I've interviewed authors like Ryan Holiday, Grant Cardone, and Robin Sharma so that I can help them promote their book to my audience of over 100,000 nonfiction readers. I'd like to do the same for you. Here's a link to my calendar. Please let me know if you have any questions. That's it. So what does that cover? I'm congratulating them. So it's sort of like a positive kind of like intro message. Congrats on the book. Like, I know how hard it is to put out a book. Congrats on the book. I've interviewed people like your friends, so now they can bypass the due diligence process. You don't need to research me. You don't need to ask me how many downloads I get. You don't need to look at my page because you know all your friends are on my show already. Try to use the biggest names possible that I see that they already follow that I've interviewed. And then what's the value? Oh, you have 100,000 followers. I state it right in that message. And then what's the next step? I make it as easy as possible. Here's a link to my calendar. Let me know if you have any questions. And that works. I'm a surgeon with my words. I do not try to like write a 10-paragraph essay about why I think they're really cool and about all the value that I can provide. I just have a few sentences. That's it.
And no numbers. You don't throw numbers out.
No.
See, this is I also ask this for some selfish reasons because I reach out to a lot of people every day. And that calendar thing, that I'm definitely going to be using that. Just putting like the availability because sometimes I find it kind of gets lost in that going back and forth between finding a date. Like it kind of gets not lost. And especially if you're reaching out to big people, like they're busy, like they're very busy. And so that calendar is really helpful. And so I heard you talk about a lunch that you got with Anthony Lawley, and that really opened your eyes. I believe the story is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you contacted him, and at the lunch you were like, because he's worth $100 million. You asked him like, why are you having lunch with me out of everyone? And what was the response that he gave you? He gave you a really good response.
Yeah, he said, nobody's ever asked me to lunch or coffee before through Instagram. I'm like, what do you mean nobody's asked you? Yeah, nobody had ever reached out and asked him. This guy's worth $100 million, wrote a book. He's famous on social media. Nobody asked him. Can you believe that? Well, I know you can believe it because it happened, but yeah, the lesson there, so sort of like the hot girl analogy, like the hot girl at the bar, all the guys are scared to go up and talk to her. So as a result, nobody does. There's a fear of rejection. And then she leaves thinking nobody wants to talk to her because nobody goes up and asks. So I just noticed that like when I had maybe like 20K on Instagram, I'd get 100 DMs a day. No lie. I would spend hours of my time answering messages because people thought I was approachable. And so they would ask questions. Hey, I have this problem. Can you provide a book recommendation? Sure. Now at 150K or whatever, almost nobody reaches out. And I think it's because the perceived likelihood that I'm going to answer them has gone down because I have more followers. But the funny thing is, it's just like the hot girl at the bar. Because there are more followers, nobody's reaching out. Because nobody's reaching out, I'm more available.
More opportunities.
Yes. And so all these famous people that you mentioned, they're getting less inquiries than you might imagine because everybody's doing the same thing that you're doing. Oh, he's not going to answer. There's no point to reach out.
You don't know that. I mean, even if they don't answer, like okay, like they answer, like that's it. Like it's out the end of the world. And I also find too, this happens to me, is that I reach out to maybe a bigger guest and these people are busy. So they say, I'm sorry, like right now is just not a good time. Like I'm releasing a book. I'm doing all this stuff. And so like they say, reach out, and they give me a month to reach out. And so you just got to shoot your shot because you really never know. And especially nowadays in these past couple of years, these big people are going on smaller podcasts a lot.
Oh yeah.
And so like it's worth a shot just to try it out because it's content for them as well. Just to be on a podcast, it helps them out with content.
Yeah, it totally does. And I had a client tell me once that she was on Good Morning America and almost sold no books. Why? Because when you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one. And so these smaller podcasts that are a little bit more niche, if they align with the author, they might sell more books on a small podcast than they will on some bigger show that's more generalized.
So I'm going to move on to almost your story on BookThinkers. What was the inspiration behind BookThinkers?
I'll be as brief as possible because it is a long story, but my friend Alec and I were both very entrepreneurial. We had both run house painting businesses in college, and we wanted to start a business. We would meet on a weekly basis, sort of in the form of a mastermind, and talk about problems that we wanted to solve out in the world. I was reading a lot of books at the time, and so I started answering a lot of the same questions. People would say, what's a good book for this? Or what were your favorite takeaways from that? And I thought we need to start a website where we can document these takeaways. That was the very, very, very first iteration of BookThinkers. Very quickly, one of my friends, Derek, got involved, and we thought, let's launch a mobile application that can help people retain and implement more from the books they're reading. Long story short, to spoil the surprise, that never really came to be. But in anticipation of releasing that mobile application, I started to build a social media following by reviewing books and posting them online so that if this app came to be, I could sell the app into that audience. So, like I said, the app never comes out, but the audience starts to take off. And in the early days of Bookstagram, there really were no nonfiction book influencers. I think the biggest guy when I started my page had like 20K. And I remember thinking, man, if I ever had 20,000 followers, it's so much pressure. I can't imagine what it would be like to review a book and have so many people look at it. But I started small. And eventually, I think BookThinkers had about 10K when the first author reached out and said, how much does a book review cost? I want to pay you to review my book. Yeah. It was like, oh, here's this new monetization opportunity. And each and every time I would review a book, I'd ask the author, hey, is there anything else that I can help with? Anything else that you need help with related to book PR, book marketing, podcasting, social media? This is my interest. I want to work full-time in it someday, so I'm willing to try some things out for you. And over time, through repetition and a lot of failure, most things didn't work, but some did. And each time something worked, then I would improve that process and slowly make iterations. And now, like I said, we have 10 people on the team. We're working with over 100 authors a year in some type of paid capacity. BookThinkers is crossing the 7-figure mark this year, which is super cool. And all of that happened because I was open to reviewing a few books and getting paid $50 probably in the early stages to do it.
Wow. So what was that difference maker? What put it to that $50 book review to the numbers that I heard? I'm not sure if you want to say it, but the numbers that I heard before we started this podcast. How did you make that big jump?
Yeah, it was really $100 million offers by Alex Hormozi. It was, so I don't mind talking about the numbers. Like last year, BookThinkers did about 250,000. And that's because halfway through the year, I read $100 million offers. I started charging over $10,000 for specific types of engagements. People started buying them. It gave more fuel to the fire. This year, BookThinkers will do 600,000 to 700,000. So lifetime will cross the $1 million mark this year. Next year will be over $1 million. And it's a result of making iterations to these services, working with people who can afford them. You know, what's funny is I realize this, the same service, me filming short form content for an author, can provide no value or a tremendous amount of value depending on who the customer is. So if I was to film content for you, let's say you just put out a book, but you don't have a complimentary product or service to sell, you might not make any money from your investment. But let's say I'm filming content for you, but you have a course and you're a paid speaker and you do some consulting and you already have a bunch of followers. A $25K investment in BookThinkers might make you hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so the same service, me showing up and filming content, can be wildly different in terms of its ROI based on who we're working with. And so, as Alex Hormozi said, solve rich people's problems, they pay better.
Then there we go. Yeah, I feel like even in that, a lot of people, maybe they offer a little too low, right? When maybe you could have done more, So what would you say to someone that's in those early stages where they're maybe not making a lot of money right now, and they want to go to that next level where they're starting to make money from wherever they're doing? What do you say to someone that's in those early stages?
Read $100 million offers and then read $100 million leads, which Alex just came out with the other day. It's he's amazing at what he does. I think the advice that I would have to a young entrepreneur who's not making much money is have some patience. It stinks to hear that. It really does. But after interviewing all these amazing people, I've realized that each and every one of them was patient. Nobody had an overnight success story. It all took so many more years behind the scenes than we give them credit for. You think of somebody like Grant Cardone, multi-billionaire. I mean, he's really only had success in the last 10 or 15 years. Prior to that, he didn't have much success. In his late 20s, he was coming out of drug and alcohol rehab facilities. And so just have some patience. Stick with it. I read one time in a book that the road to success and failure, it's the same road. It's just somebody persevered a little bit farther, overcame a few more obstacles, learned from a few more failures, continued down the road a little bit farther, we're always 3 inches from gold, as they say. You don't want to turn back, just continue a little bit longer. I think the other thing that's weird or different about my story is that I kept a full-time job while I built BookThinkers way past what most people thought was normal. So I had full-time employees in my business while still working a full-time job. And I had a full-time job that taught me skills that translated to BookThinkers. I worked in a small software company as sort of the head of their sales department, flying around the country, negotiating big deals, managing some other people. And all of those skills translated directly into the business that I was building. Gave me more flexibility because if I had jumped too soon, I would have been operating from a place of scarcity. I didn't have to do that.
And almost desperation too. Like if you got to pay your bills and like that's your source of income, then like there's a lot of desperation that comes with that. And that can maybe hurt the business almost, right?
Yeah. And going back to the E-Myth by Michael Gerber, that's why 95% of small businesses fail. They run out of money. It's a money thing. It's always a money thing.
What's the best piece of advice that you've gotten from someone that's not from a book?
Well, that's a good transition question from the subject we were just talking about. Very early in my journey, I was meeting with my mentor, Kevin Horsley. I still meet with him today. And Kevin said to me, because I wanted to jump, I wanted to go full-time into BookThinkers. And Kevin said to me, and this is the best piece of advice, he said, don't build the parachute on the way down. Build it before you jump. So many entrepreneurs jump too soon. They go into a full-time business. They burn out of cash. They end up compromising on their values. They discount their services and their integrity. They operate from a place of scarcity. And as a result, that bleeds into the entire business and it comes crumbling down. Kevin said, view your full-time job as a sponsor in the same way that a golfer has to show up to a photo shoot, and sign a bunch of pictures or whatever so that they can get paid to do what they truly want to do, which is golf. They don't always make money golfing. They make money from the sponsors. And so he said, view your full-time job as a sponsor for growing your side hustle, which is what you really want to do, BookThinkers. And I waited. Like I said, I waited far longer than most people are willing to wait, and it's paid dividends.
What's your advice to someone who they were kind of confused on when to make that jump full time? Because this is something relevant to me. When do you make that switch to go full time? When do you think is a good moment where you can be like, okay, it's time? And so it might be different for everyone, right?
Yeah, I think it is different for everyone. I don't know if I have the right answer to this question. Here are a few things that I would consider. I would try to build up a nest egg, an emergency fund, so that if you don't make any money for the first 12 months of your side hustle, you're still okay. I think that having a 12-month emergency fund, in a business that hasn't made money yet, like your side hustle hasn't made any money yet, that's probably a good enough runway. Or wait until your side hustle can pay you a full-time income. And that's what I decided to do. So I decided to wait until BookThinkers was already doing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and employed other people. I had already delegated all the stuff I didn't want to do, and voila, I could make the jump. It was a little bit more seamless that way because there wasn't as much risk. Yeah. So those are some of the things that I would consider.
You have your own book coming out in November. We're recording this in August. It's called Rise of the Reader. What's the impact that you want this book to have on the people who buy it?
Great question. Over the years, literally hundreds of people from my community have some variation of the following thing. Hey, Nick, you're recommending a lot of cool books, and I've read some of them because they address problems I'm currently facing, but I'm having a tough time translating information into action. And I know you're doing it. How do you do it? And I would always send those people a voice note. Maybe I would type out a couple of paragraphs. I would get on a call, maybe spend a half an hour with them, tell them what I do. But I knew I was doing a disservice. Like I was leaving something on the table. I wasn't giving it my best effort because I knew what I was doing would really take an entire book to explain. Everything from setting the right intention for each book that you read, scheduling reading time into your calendar, how to take effective notes, how to rewrite those takeaways to improve retention, how to review them systematically, how to build an activity tracker to measure your activity, how to build an accountability group so that other people can hold you accountable to implementing these things. All of those are things that I do. and they all take a while to explain. So I decided I have to write a book to solve this problem. I'm serving my younger self, like the version of me who just picked up Rich Dad, Poor Dad and didn't know anything about how to take action on them. I've read 500 books now. I've gone through this process so many times. I know what I do in order to translate information into action now. And so that's why I decided to write the book, for that person who's struggling and they know they're living under their potential and they want sort of like a road map or a framework to get there.
So you're 29, approaching 30. And for some, and someone who's 24, that's a terrifying number, but I realized too, I'm like, wait, that's only like 6 years from now for me. So, so if you can go back to when you were 20, what would you change? If you could go back right now from 20, what do you think are your biggest regrets from your 20s if you had to really think about it?
When you told me you were going to ask me this question, my mind originally went to the first answer I'm going to give, which is I don't have any regrets. I'm literally living the life that I dreamed of designing when I was 20. And so, the advice to that person is patience. Like, you're going to build it and it will happen. In the future, I don't dream of something very different than what I have today. I just want more of the same, maybe more impact, more money, more health, more happiness. But like, I'm already sort of maxing out some of those buckets, especially the happiness and fulfillment bucket. And so I just want more of the same. So yeah, I'd go back and tell that person to be patient. If I had any regrets, this is going to sound kind of tongue in cheek, but like, I wish I traveled a little bit more. I wish that I got some more tattoos. I wish I did some more crazy extreme sports. Like, I've done all of those things, but I think I'm a little bit, I have some constraints now. I'm married. I have a dog. Eventually, I'm going to have some kids. I won't be able to travel as much. I've been to 25 countries so far, but I wish I'd been to 50. As far as like extreme sports and stuff, I've done bungee jumping and I've jumped out of planes and I've done all these extreme activities and, whatever. But like, I'm starting to manage risk a little bit differently, especially once you start to have some kids. Like, you're a little bit more risk averse. And so I wish I did some of those more extreme things, I think, throughout my 20s. But outside of that, life's good and I'm happy with where I'm at.
My last question is, what would you tell your younger self? If, let's say, you had a minute with your younger self, what would you tell them?
I'd say you are on the right path. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Remember that you will learn the most by failing. So seek failure as fast as possible. But like, do you, dude. Keep doing you. You're going to figure it out.